All right, now I'm joined in studio by Thandiwe Matthews, an attorney with a strong passion for human rights and social justice, as well as Ms. Pumela Salela, an independent advisor in the information technology sector. A very good morning, ladies. Happy Women's Day, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
All right, now, ladies, first and foremost, what does this year's theme mean to you? Let's start with you, Thandiwe.
Well, I mean, 20 years into democracy, I think we've made huge gains. It's also a time to remember what the women in 1956 went through, you know. It wasn't just about creating opportunities for us for work, for example, but it was also about showing the strength and resilience of women, the fact that women could influence political discourse. That has basically shaped our political trajectory today. And I think that's what I'm inspired by 20 years into democracy, the fact that women can be strong, that you can have equal amount of power in shaping decision-making processes, etc. That you don't need to fit into gender norms and stereotypes, that you can be equally as womanly in as much as being powerful. And that the world's your oyster, basically, that you can strive to be whoever you want to be. So.
Very interesting indeed, Sis Pumela.
Thank you so much. For me, when we talk about moving women's agenda forward, I would like us to just have a point of reflection where we pause and think about what is it that the women in 1956 were marching for. And we think about it, essentially they were marching about freedom of movement. And so as we pause, we must not take this for granted, because these women were not allowed to move within their own country, and let alone internationally. Privileges that we enjoy in these 20 years of democracy in our own country. The government of the day was trying to maintain the population segregation, trying to control urbanization, and making sure that they were managing migrant labor. And now, today, 20 years onwards, we can say that we are free. We are free to move in this country, and that's why there's such a great synergy with this year's theme, as you've correctly asked, which is talking about moving women's agenda forward.
Let's move our agenda forward, ladies. I want to get to know you better. Thandiwe, tell us a bit about your work. I mean, at 30, you bring a lot of people into awe. Tell us a bit about your job.
Well, I'm a senior legal officer at the South African Human Rights Commission, and what we do is we basically assess human rights violations taking place on the ground and then try and escalate them to being addressed at national hearings. We also try to look at trends that might require strategic impact litigation, where you'd have the impact of shaping law and policy. We need to understand that as much as we've got a very progressive constitution, it only becomes real once it's implemented. So that process is something that takes time. It's something that requires experience. It's something that we learn from our mistakes. It's not something that's going to happen perfectly all the time. And it also makes us realize that activism is always important for us to be able to understand what the issues are happening on the ground. So, yes, in trying to implement the objectives and ideals of our constitution, we are realizing that there are lots of challenges, but also that we've got an amazing framework in place that can assist us in alleviating those challenges. We just need to constantly be aware of where those challenges are and try and find strategic ways in order to ensure that they get implemented. So that's the majority of the work that I do.
Very interesting indeed. Now, Sis Pumela, you're a multi-dimensional businesswoman. Tell us about your journey.
What I would like to highlight is my being a global fellow in social innovation, because that's a new concept that is coming to the world. But it's an exciting concept because it's about encouraging systems entrepreneurs and also social entrepreneurs. Systems entrepreneurs are those people that can go into a system or any environment and be able to identify areas where they create change, but change that is change for good, change for the benefit of the broader community. And then when we talk about social innovators, we're talking about those people who are able to identify problems within society and come up with innovative solutions to aid those problems. So I've been one of the 18 people globally that have been selected to be global fellows in social innovation, and the only South African in that regard.
Congratulations to you.
So much.
Now, ladies, let's get into it. 20 years since the gaining of democracy in South Africa, women are still the face of poverty and inequality, unemployment, as well as landlessness among those remaining formidable changes. What's the status of the South African woman 20 years later? Let's start with you, Thandi.
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that our experiences are very different depending on our race and our class background. At the end of the day, the recent stats that I read were that 61% of women are still living in abject poverty. 31% of them, I think, are destitute. So my experience as a young, black, middle-class woman is extremely different. I'm able to access an education. I'm able to access resources. I'm able to wear whatever I want and go wherever I want and eat wherever I want without needing to think about the daily struggles that the majority of women in this country are still experiencing. And I think we tend to kind of ignore that.
Overlook.
Because our society is still quite segregated. So as soon as we've made it for ourselves, it's very easy to ignore the challenges that are being faced by the majority of people in our country. We do a lot of work on water and sanitation at the Commission. And the fact that women still have to walk 200 meters to go and use a toilet that is shared by a community or a household of, or not just a household, 5 households of an average of 20 people, and those toilets are not being cleaned. So it's easier for you or cleaner for you to go and defecate in the bush, which is unsafe. That's the reality of the majority of women in our country at the moment, and it's something that we need to constantly remind ourselves about, because as much as there is opportunity for us, that's also very limited, depending on who you are and where you come from. So I think that's just something to bear in mind 20 years into democracy.
Very encouraging words. Ms. Pumela, now, did your social background and were you exposed to the segregation because of your background?
I was, although I was very young. I was born in the Eastern Cape in the former Transkei. And I remember that when we were going to visit our grandmother, who was in Port Elizabeth, we had to cross the border so that we could enter from Umtata or the former Transkei into what was called South Africa at that time. And I remember one day we were in a bus in the middle of the night and police came in to search us inside the bus. It was a traumatic experience as young as I was, and now to learn that it was actually the same country, South Africa, that we were living in, but it was just that we were segregated in terms of the former homelands and what was called South Africa at that time.
Now, ladies, what are some of the major challenges that are facing women in the workplace? Thandi.
Well, I think to a large extent, as much as we've achieved quota, I mean, a lot of workplaces have transformed in terms of how many women are represented within the workplace. But I'm not so sure how much those numbers actually influence discourse within the workplace. So how you are able to interact, how your opinions are accepted, whether they are valued, whether you're just supposed to kind of integrate into whatever the dominant structure currently is. So if a man's working 12 hours, you work 14, So those are still, I think, numerous challenges that we are experiencing. Also being taken seriously. I find that quite challenging.
Very interesting, Thandi. Well, we're going to continue with our discussion, but before we do that, let's take a look now at this very brief profile of Thato Mokutu, a businesswoman intent on bettering the lives of others. Very inspirational woman indeed. Now, Pumela, I also wanted to find out from you, what are the major challenges that are facing women, especially in business? We know that it's a man's world.
You know what, Alicia, indeed it is a man's world, but I'm also going to towards women, in the sense that the PhD syndrome still does exist.
Absolutely.
So
and I want us to delve straight into it in great detail. Let's go ahead.
Because you still do find pockets of women who, when they are successful, they don't want to bring others up. So we also need to do an introspection and look into ourselves as women and make sure that we question ourselves in terms of how many more women are we bringing with us? Are we paying forward? Are we plowing back into the communities that we come from?
We evolved 20 years later, even the smart ID now. Ladies, let's talk about this. What does the 60th anniversary then of the Women's March mean to women today? And what should women of today take from this? And let's just hear from our visuals in Durban. Our reporter asked a very important question, that why are young women not part of these events? Where is the succession going to start? Pumela, let's start with you.
I think what we need to call for is for women's organizations to themselves mobilize young women and to make sure that there are targeted initiatives that are aimed at empowering young women, even at an early age. Because of what we see happening to girls as old as 10 years old, it means that it's never too early to start conscientizing young girls about our past, where we come from, our present, and where we hope to go into the future.
Tandu, what are your views?
I think it's really important for young women of all cultures and backgrounds to start interacting with each other. Recently, we saw these two girls from UP, University of Pretoria, painting their faces black. And a large outcry with people not understanding why that might be racist. It clearly indicates to me that a lot of people don't know about the experiences of a lot of working-class black women in this country. And I think that, you know, if we are going to start seeing an actively transformed society, even amongst women, if we want to encourage mobilization between women, if we want to ensure that there's equality that exists between us, we need to start ensuring that women of all races, ages, cultures are able to integrate with each other as equals, because that kind of strength is what will generate the equality that we need in our society.
But then, Tandu, you mentioned that the reason there's such a high rise in this PhD syndrome is, of course, because of that competition. Where do you then draw the line between competition and Ubuntu and wanting to succeed?
Well, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I don't think that you can say it's either, you know, we're going to stick to ourselves and try and be competitive, or we're going to have Ubuntu. We need to start understanding that empowerment is about embracing all people. It's about giving your skills back to your community. It's about understanding that your purpose in the world, for me at least, is not to be an individual. It's to absorb as much from the world so that you can give back to the world. And that's the lesson that I learned from the women of 1956. I was raised by many strong women. My grandmother today, at 86 years old, is participating in the march in Cape Town for Gaza. You know, you need to be able to say that we all have a purpose in life. And at some point, we need to reflect within ourselves and ask ourselves what that purpose is. If it is a selfish one, then I don't really have time for you. So
I want to introduce a concept that is called co-opetition. And that involves competing yet cooperating. It is possible that within a workplace you can, yes, have those ambitions of being competitive, but that does not mean that you can take away the values of being able to help other people, bring other people with you. And for me, again, one of the things that are deeply impressive about the women of 1956 was the unity. The unity that Thandi has mentioned, which was across races, across ages, and also the dignity and the discipline. Because from what we hear, there was a time when they stood still for 30 minutes. They did not create violence. There was no anarchy. But what they were clear about was the focus of what it is that they were fighting for.
But now, ladies, women like the public protector, Thuli Madonsela, have made significant strides in redefining the place and role of women in society today. But is the number of such women significant enough to have a ripple effect across the country? Thandi.
Well, I mean, Thuli Madonsela is an amazing and phenomenal woman. Unfortunately, there are not enough of her. We see in our judiciary, for example, as much as we have more women judges, there aren't enough.
No.
Women are not exposed to the quality of work that they need to develop their expertise and skills in order to fulfill such an office. And that's really problematic. We need to start on the ground where you say, what does education mean? What does empowerment actually mean? And we need to acknowledge that someone like Thuli Madonsela has also had a lot of privilege and exposure, which enabled her to get to the position that she is today. If not all women are able to access those opportunities from a young age to understand their value and their worth, then unfortunately we're not going to see a ripple effect.
Sis Pumela.
I think we have a lot of role models in our lifetime. I think as South Africans, we must really consider ourselves blessed. And there are a lot of role models for young people to be able to look up to. For example, the Speaker of Parliament, Umamu Baleka, is a woman. And you find that there are also South Africans which are representing not only South Africa, but a bigger cause which relates to gender and women issues at international organizations. We have, for example, Geraldine Fraser-Muleketi in the African Development Bank. We have Umamu Nkosazana Zuma leading the African Union Commission. So we have a lot that we can look up to. And also, as young people, we also need to do our homework in terms of developing ourselves with the necessary skills, with the necessary education, so that we can, as Africans, be equal players in the global space.
Well, don't take it from me. Take it from the expert, Pumela.
I just want to first start by saying that empowerment is not an exclusive domain of women alone. We must also encourage those men who are progressive and believe in women's development. And secondly, I just want us to remember that in 1956, when those women were marching against the past laws, they wanted freedom, they wanted justice, they wanted security. And what I like about what they said is that they said, we shall not rest until we have won for our children. And so for me, that was a generational effect. They were saying that they're doing what they're doing for future generations.
Absolutely.
Which reminds me of a quote by Sekou Toure in the book by Frantz Fanon called Wretched of the Earth, where he says each generation must, out of its relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it.
Thank you so much, ladies, and a very happy Women's Day to you. That was, of course, Ms. Thandiwe Matthews, an attorney with a strong passion for human rights and social justice, as well as Ms. Pumela Salela, an independent advisor in the information technology sector. Well, that's how we wrap our special Women's Day broadcast right here on SABC News. At this moment, I'd like to thank my studio guests for their valuable presence in studio today. We'd also thank our reporters, Ayanda Mhlongo and Linda Mgobozi, out in Umlazi in Durban. And thank you for being with us. Happy Women's Day to all the ladies. And before we go, we will be handing over now to our reporter, Lukhanyo Kalata, who's out at Cape Town City Hall, where the annual Nelson Mandela Lecture is currently taking place. Happy Women's Day.